Jordan, I think it shows my my little dialog box, so I'm gonna make sure that goes off. Okay. All right. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us again this week, or if you're joining us for the first time, welcome. My name is Kayla Weststein, and I am with the Early Learning Division. I'm in charge of making sure that the employment-related daycare program and the teams that support it, the subsidies suspensions team, the direct pay unit, and the child care policy team, move over to the newly created Department of Early Learning and Care on July 1st. ELD is becoming the Department of Early Learning and Care on July 1st, and I'll talk about that a little bit more here in a second. But I'm going to hand it over to Jordan to introduce herself.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jordan Pargetter, pronouns she, her, and I'm also with the Early Learning Division. And I work with CCDF, which is the Child Care Development Fund, and the related policies surrounding that. So that has a lot to do with employment-related daycare, as well as this whole transition of the program over from ODHS to the Department of Early Learning and Care. We're happy to have you tonight.
We also have two great partners, Tara and Regina, on from the Oregon Department of Human Services. They're here as well tonight if we have any questions collectively for the two agencies, but I won't make them introduce themselves. Instead, I just want to preview our agenda for the night. We went through introductions. Tonight is the second and last information session before the Rules Advisory Committee is scheduled to occur between ODHS and ELD for the transition of the ERDC rules over to DELC. So ODHS needs to repeal its rule set related to ERDC and move it over to ELD. And these two sessions and this session in particular are to orient folks to how policy making for ERDC is going to be done at the future Department of Early Learning and Care. So I'll preview a little bit of what is DELC and why is ERDC moving. And then Jordan's going to take us through some upcoming ERDC changes, how policies will be changed for ERDC. And then we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at a process map that outlines how DELC is expecting to do engagement with our community partners around ERDC policy changes in the future. So just a little bit of a timeline here. We're in this second red box. The 3 Rules Advisory Committee meetings are coming up. They're all on Thursdays. And the one on March 9th is going to go over ODHS's rules. Like I mentioned, it's really a repeal of ERDC. So there are a lot of rules just being repealed whole cloth. And some of them are being amended to remove ERDC specific provisions. And then the second meeting and the third meeting on the 16th and the 23rd are going to be to discuss the new DELC rule set that supports ERDC. And so those meetings are coming up. If you haven't already signed up and you are interested in participating in the Rules Advisory Committee, there's a link on the website. And Jordan, I think at some point in this meeting, we'll drop that link in our chat. Please make sure you're signing up. It's the way that you can get reimbursed for the meeting. And also it's the way that you would receive the meeting invites to actually attend. So just wanted to flag that for you. And Jordan, thank you for dropping that in the chat. So what is the Department of Early Learning and Care? Our slides are branded the Oregon Department of Education, Early Learning Division. You're saying DELC. Maybe you're not familiar with HB 3073. A couple of years ago, the legislature passed a sort of overhaul package of legislation aimed at really unifying and strengthening the early learning system. It created the Department of Early Learning and Care, and as a part of creating it, it took what is currently within the Early Learning Division, it paired it with the employment-related daycare program that's currently at ODHS, but will be transferring, and it sort of directs DELC to stand up an agency that supports its current programming and the ERDC program in pursuit of really having sort of coordinated, culturally appropriate, and family-centered services along the early learning system. And so that is what DELC is aiming to do. This is a little bit more about all of the pieces that are coming in-house to DELC. So I mentioned a little bit the early learning division, also that includes the Office of Child Care. We have the employment-related daycare program. And then along with the direct pay unit, there are the other teams I mentioned, the subsidy suspensions team and the child care policy team. And some of you all may be familiar with the Inclusive Partners team that used to be at ODHS. We actually brought that in-house a little bit early as of July of last year. And so all of these things are going to combine to make the Department of Early Learning and Care. Any questions about what DELC is, why ERDC is coming to DELC, what does it mean? Anything that folks would like more information on? If
One
not,
thing,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
no worries. I just wanted to flag also that just in case there's any panic and wanting to maybe do screen grabs or anything like that, I just wanted to let everyone know that these slides, as well as the slides from last week, will be available online. What we're going to do is gather any questions or follow-up items and include them onto one consolidated slide as well. And so those will all be available online at the link that I posted in the chat.
Perfect. Thank you, Jordan. Perfect segue for you to introduce ERDC.
Wonderful. So some of you were there last week at the last information session, so I apologize for some of this information being a repeat. We just want to make sure we're covering for any new guests that might be on the line. So what is the employment-related daycare program? Perhaps you have a lot of awareness of the program, perhaps you don't. Employment-related daycare, otherwise known as ERDC, is Oregon's primary main childcare assistance program. So what it does is it helps families who are eligible for the program pay for their childcare costs by making payments directly to the childcare provider of their choosing. Essentially, families are given a small amount called a copay that they pay directly to their provider, and the state pays a set rate or the state maximum rate to the provider for the number of hours the child is scheduled to be in care. It is just one thing to note is that families do have to use what's called a listed provider, and we'll get into that, I think, later on in the presentation. But that's the only real caveat there on the provider side. The program is funded through, as I mentioned before, the Federal Child Care Development Fund, CCDF. And so it's subject to federal rules and laws surrounding that. Essentially, CFR, or the Code of Federal Regulations, establishes a baseline eligibility criteria, basically for all states to follow. And then within that criteria, states have flexibility in how that is kind of managed on a local level. So CFR establishes baseline eligibility criteria with age, income limits, and work requirements, and then also standards as to how states distribute payments, establish provider rates, and then family co-payments. The program is funded with both federal dollars and state general fund. Right here, we have some information around the budget for 21-23. And then also one thing that we just have to kind of touch on is that the program does exist within what's referred to as a budget box. And that really just means that there is a limit to the number of families that can be served at any one time based on the amount of the budget that exists and the number of families that are applying. Okay, this next slide here speaks around ERDC governance, rules, and policy changes. So we're kind of going to talk about the current process as well as the future process, which we'll get into more within the presentation as well. So ERDC presently is governed and administrated through the Oregon Department of Human Services and through their policymaking process. With the implementation of House Bill 3073, the program will move to the newly created Department of Early Learning and Care, or DELC, as Kayla referred to earlier, on July 1st. And at that time, policy will be determined through the Early Learning Council and through DELC rulemaking processes. So today, we're really just going to talk about some of the upcoming and recent changes to ERDC, the rules transfer with the Oregon administrative rules from ODHS to DELC, and then also kind of an idea of how you'll be able to provide meaningful engagement and feedback going forward. All right, I'm going to go kind of high level on this one because I think many people on the call have some understanding of recent changes that have happened for ERDC, but I do want to touch on some expansions that have been made as of January 1st that we're very excited about in collaboration with the Oregon Department of Human Services. The first change here is part or full-time authorization of hours. Families that are in ERDC used to have hours determined on a really granular level that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And now they're actually approved on a part-time or full-time basis, sometimes even higher than that based on need. So that is very exciting. It helps out with more stability, I think, throughout the certification period, and kind of helps providers and parents have a little bit better idea of what to expect. The second thing here is student eligibility, and the real high level of that is that non-working students, so students that are in high school, a GED program, or college, can qualify for ERDC regardless of whether or not they have employment. That used to be a requirement that there was employment, and so now that's an area that we've removed, as well as any stipulation on the number of hours and constraints that were related to those work hours. Additionally, there's been study time added for families that are students that did not used to exist as well. Sleep time for two-parent households, which is very exciting. And then authorized medical leave can now be approved upon certification. So families that are on leave from employment when they first apply can be eligible for ERDC, where previously they would have not been eligible for that authorized medical leave period or secured childcare slot while they're on medical leave, unless they had already been approved for benefits while working. Additionally, one last thing on authorized medical leave is that that can also be approved for children within the household who have an illness. So it's not just specific to the caretaker now, it can be applied for caring for a sick child as well. And then additionally, we have some changes that are being expected for July 1st and beyond. The first one, and we're going to get into these, but we have a reduction in the number of reasons a case might close mid-certification, categorical eligibility for TANF recipients, and then eligibility for all children regardless of immigration or citizenship status. Like I said, we're going to get into those on a more in-depth level.
Before we move on to the future centered changes, does anyone have any questions about the January 1 expansions? Okay, hearing none.
And you can always put questions in the chat as well. We're monitoring that. So if something comes up that you want to put in there as well, we'll try to address that as well. Okay, so this first piece here is around preserving a truer, what we're calling, 12-month eligibility period by removing reasons that cases close. So essentially, federal regulations do require a 12-month eligibility minimum period for all families that are accessing CCDF subsidy. Right now, ERDC is approved for 12 months, but during that period, there's a lot of reasons why cases will close. So some of those reasons might be that a family can't find a childcare provider within a certain period of time. They might lose their income or lose their job and then go on authorized work search and that expires, etc. There's a high variety of reasons why cases are closing. And so it isn't really what we're calling a true 12-month eligibility period because of that. So starting July 1st, ERDC will only close cases within that 12-month certification period for a few reasons. And those reasons are if a family moves out of state, if a family requests that their benefits should be closed, if benefits were determined in error, so if faulty information was provided, that sort of thing, or if the family's income exceeds the ongoing and exit income limits, which is either 85% of the state median income or 250% of the federal poverty level, whichever is higher based on family size. And that piece there for that 85% SMI is a CCDF federal requirement, just to note. One thing that we did want to note, and I kind of touched on it earlier, but these cases won't close anymore because a family might not be able to find a provider within a 2 or 3 month period. A lot of times we've seen cases close for that reason, and it has to restart the whole process over for families applying for benefits while their provider is becoming listed to be approved for payment. Additionally, cases won't close in the event of job loss. This is because we're making expansions to authorized work search, and that's really allowing kind of an extension through the remainder of the certification period. So if someone loses their job, they don't have to return to their work situation within that certification period, they would be allowed to finish out that 12-month certification regardless. Are there any questions on this piece?
I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, Jordan. Just someone, Leslie is noting that, it's great that we're removing the closure reason if they can't connect with the provider, which we feel similarly about that change as well. I did just want to pause here. I think this is maybe the first time we're really previewing what this might look like. Much of this policy is already well through the way of the design process in the one system, and we're going to talk a little bit about the implications of that later. But are there any questions about sort of the changes around 12-month eligibility? Okay. Jordan, we want to move it to TANF.
Let's
All
go.
right.
So one more of the expansions that is expected July 1st, 2023, is that ERDC will be available to families receiving Temporary Assistance for Needy Families grants, or TANF, through what is called categorical eligibility. And so what this really means is that families that are receiving TANF will be eligible for their childcare costs to be paid through ERDC without a copay amount, regardless of their work or school activities. So really what we're excited about with this is that families will be able to receive TANF and ERDC at the same time. In the past, this has been an area where families couldn't have dual enrollment in both programs. And so we're very excited about the concept of them being able to receive both with no interruption to either benefit or service. Kind of the technical how will this work element there is that families will be eligible for a part-time monthly allocation. So earlier with January 1st changes, we talked about how families are now eligible for either a part-time or full-time allocation of hours. So TANF families will be automatically eligible for a part-time allocation. And then if they need full-time hours, that can be requested. And that can also be approved based on their well-being or jobs activities. And that can even be greater than full-time potentially as well. And then eligibility for families that are receiving TANF will be specifically outlined within our Oregon CCDF state plan. And that will allow us to be able to use CCDF federal dollars, which is also extremely exciting. One note that we just wanted to add here is that families do have to request childcare benefits. So they will be eligible should that they request those benefits and go through the application process, but they do have to request them in order for there to be a date of request established for ERDC. And certain federal requirements do still apply, such as immunizations, but that requirement in particular also has the opportunity for exemptions, the same as any other family applying for ERDC.
So Jordan, we have a question in the chat, which is DELC taking over the TANF jobs program, or is that still led by ODHS? TANF jobs proper will still continue to be led by ODHS.
Thank you.
No problem. There are some changes coming to TANF childcare. Especially because we are making childcare available through ERDC to TANF families, and because of the part-time, full-time allocation and the flexibility of hours, we expect that TANF childcare will be needed far less. And so if there are some changes coming, but if there are more questions about that, we could refer you to the right ODHS partners who could talk a little bit more about that change. But TANF jobs proper, that is retained by ODHS. And second, Leslie asked, so we said that it will be childcare without a copay. So what does that mean? Will they have to find a provider who will accept the ERDC amount?
Yeah, so families won't be assigned a copay amount like other families that are applying for ERDC have a copay based on their income and family size. As far as having to find a specific provider, they just need to find a provider that is listed to receive payment with the direct pay unit, just like any other family receiving ERDC. The state can still pay up to the maximum state allocated amounts. The family just wouldn't have a portion of that payment as their co-payment to pay first. I hope
And
that
Jordan,
covers it.
can I ask a clarifying question
Okay.
related to that? My understanding is that sort of the same as it would have been for TANF provided, childcare provided through TANF. If you were receiving childcare through TANF, you still also would have needed to have a listed provider that met the same requirements. So that's not a change.
Correct. Yeah. The big change here is that there's going to be 12-month eligibility for these families because they'll be on ERDC. So that's a really exciting change. And then also that their number of hours, because they're going to get just a part-time monthly allocation of hours unless full-time is needed, that isn't based solely upon like their jobs plan that they might have otherwise.
That's right. It will also be available, whereas TANF childcare now is available to those in the jobs plan category. ERDC categorical eligibility, via TANF is available to all TANF families, not just those with the jobs plan or in jobs activities. Any other questions about categorical eligibility for ERDC for TANF families? David, anything else you wanted to make sure that we were bringing to the table on this one?
Nothing from me.
Okay. Jordan, shall we move to immigration and legal status?
Sure.
All right.
Okay, so we don't have a lot to share on this, unfortunately, but another element of House Bill 3073 and some of the required expansions for ERDC is eligibility for all children, regardless of their immigration or citizenship status. At present, children do have to meet certain citizenship or immigration requirements, and we know that this is a barrier for families accessing benefits. So we'll have more information as we continue to develop this policy and engage with the community to get feedback on that. But we did want to flag that this is something that will be coming in the future. And Kayla or David, if you'd like to add anything else, feel free.
David, do you maybe want to contextualize this policy change in relation to the engagement process we're going to share in a few moments? Or would you like me to do that?
I'm not exactly sure what you were looking for in terms of the context, but I'll just sort of add that this one is a particularly sort of complicated one to implement because it requires not just sort of the changes within IT systems around eligibility, but because we cannot use the federal CCDF dollars for this purpose, it requires us to be able to track the dollars differently at the level of the child. So we need to be able to say that the child care assistance that was provided for a child without documented citizenship status was not using the federal Child Care Development Fund dollars. So that's part of the reason why the implementation timeline for this piece that was also in the HB 3073 legislation is going to be much longer than some of the other pieces. So Kayla, I'm not sure if that's what you were prompting.
I think that was great clarity. I think Katie, you have I hope I'm saying your name correctly. You have your hand up.
Yeah, it's Kathy.
Oh,
Question.
sorry.
No, you're fine. So I briefly heard you guys mention that it seems like there will be opportunities to get feedback from the community.
Yes.
Will that be sent out via email, or how will we know when feedback will be taken from the community?
So I think this is a perfect segue into our sort of next steps on how ERDC policymaking is anticipated to roll out at DELC. In particular to this policy, I think the thing that I would flag is, whereas with the two pieces and expansions that we discussed before related to TANF categorical eligibility and the truer 12-month eligibility, we're very far down the line in terms of shaping that policy and making systems changes. And I'll show you where we are when we look at the process map in a few moments. But this policy, the eligibility for children regardless of immigration or citizenship status, we're sort of more at the beginning stages. And it's our goal to start creating and making room for those tables where engagement can happen in different pockets and different venues. And so those are, I think, they're coming. They're not, I think, formalized enough to the point where I can answer your question tonight with a concrete here's how. But what we like to talk with you all tonight about is just sort of looking at the preview of how we would expect to set that up with more information about what do those venues and tables look like. And I think that the eligibility for children regardless of immigration and citizenship status is a really good example of something that we're going to turn from talking about a policy making process to really working through a policy making process in a way that does focus on engagement. So that's, oh, sorry, David.
Well, I was just gonna, I think, underline, what you were saying, and just sort of add, Department of Early Learning and Care will become a reality on July 1st. We have the big move of ERDC, employment-related daycare, into that new agency. So I think the honest answer is this is all new territory, and I think part of the reason that we're hosting these meetings right now and the discussion that I think we're also about to enter into is to also continue to work with partners on how to build out this work, as well as to figure out and hear from you some of the best ways in terms of engaging partners in these policy discussions. So I think just to highlight, it really is a work in progress at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or thoughts from the group?
The only thing I wanted to flag, Kayla, was in relation to what David spoke on for this particular policy change. Just because we do have to use general funds to cover these children, one of the things I think we want to engage with the community on is we are very aware of the need to secure privacy for these families as well. And so that is a high priority going forward in developing this policy.
Yes.
Thank you for adding that, Jordan. Yeah, I think that's really important.
I couldn't agree more. Okay, it sounds like we're going to keep moving forward. So a little bit about how policy changes will be made for ERDC. Jordan, you want to take it away?
Sure. So I think we've already touched on this, but when the DELC is created and ERDC migrates to DELC, it will still actually operate within the one system where other self-sufficiency programs within ODHS live. So this is really important. It'll remain a support for Oregonians that are able to apply for and access multiple services at once, such as SNAP and TANF. And because the program will remain in one, that means that ERDC policy changes will need to occur with the support and collaboration of other agencies in a way that is a little bit different from other policy changes. So any policy or rule changes that do happen for ERDC, they correlate to functionality written within the one system. So Oregon administrative rules are literally written into the functionality of the one system. And so any policy changes that we might try to enact do typically require some level of technical changes or impacts to other programs. And so that's sort of just some framing. We're going to go through a policy map that you can see kind of where things fit within the policymaking process. But really, it's all tied to the fact that ERDC is remaining a part of that one system and the technical kind of details surrounding that.
I think this is going to take us to our process map, and you guys are going to have to forgive me for some logistics. We're going to hop to a Visio document of our proposed engagement and sort of policy making process. And I just want to make sure that everyone can now see the map. Could someone confirm for me?
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Visio gives me a lot of trouble. And I know it's zoomed out and the boxes are illegible at the moment. I will zoom in, I promise, but I just want to do a little bit of an orientation to what this document is designed to do, and hopefully how it becomes useful for all of us collectively as we think about what's the right way to build policy together around ERDC. So what we're looking at here is a sort of soup to nuts look at a policy change need being identified all the way to the execution and implementation of said policy change. The one thing that I'd like to flag before we zoom in is this, what I call a cheese wedge, which is a very scientific term, that as we move along this process, the sort of systems requirements within the one system become more and more and more defined for any given policy change. And what that means is we get locked in to policy parameters. And so there are fewer and fewer opportunities for DELC to incorporate community partner feedback as we move further to the right in this process. And I'll sort of identify where what I call the pinch point is. But I just wanted to give that sort of context and overlays, you know, as we move along this process, you know, we really are sort of growing limited in our ability to continue incorporating feedback that's been given. David, do you want to do any more sort of table setting while I zoom in, or is that good?
You know, I'll just add, you know, to go back to this all being a process of learning. I think what we're sharing with you today was a little bit of also our opportunity to sort of reflect on what we've sort of learned in, you know, over the last year. And, you know, we wanted to be able to really think very intentionally about how and when in the process can community engagement have the most impact. And I think part of the learning, I think for us is that, you know, I think for a lot of the work that we've done in the past, the rulemaking process and the engagement around rules has often been one of the places where some of the best opportunities has been to hear from community partners and make changes based on that input from community partners. I think for reasons that Kayla and Jordan will go into in a little bit more detail in a moment, we're realizing that's not the most effective, that model won't actually necessarily work most effectively for employment-related daycare because of when, as Kayla was saying, policy decisions sometimes need to be locked in much earlier than before you get to that stage in the process. So this was our attempt to be intentional about thinking about how to, you know, where community engagement can have the greatest impact, and be also to share with community partners expectations so that you can also understand where those opportunities are and why they're in that place.
And then Kayla, I'm just wondering if you can zoom in a little bit more. The wording is just a little bit hard to read. I want to make sure everyone on the call can see it.
All righty, I can do that. Let me just try and preserve our swoopy arrows. Is that better?
Yes, that's great.
Great. Okay. So at the beginning of the process, we have a policy change, identified, whether that's through community engagement, whether it's internally generated by the Department of Early Learning and Care or our partners over at ODHS, because many changes that happen in other programs impact ERDC as well. We often try to align requirements between TANF and SNAP and ERDC, so it makes it easier for families to apply for all of them and not have to deal with several sets of requirements, or whether it's a sort of IT or infrastructure or provider driven change. The idea here is we know perhaps, we need to make a change. We move into DELC's internal process of identifying, do we have the budget? Is it CCDF compliant? Is this in line with the administration's priorities? And we start to look at, okay, what does it really mean to make this change? Most changes to ERDC, if not all, are going to require both rules changes and systems changes to the one system. And as David and Jordan have previously stated, much of the rule language is just hard coded into the one system, or much of the rule language reflects exactly what the one system is sort of programmed to do in terms of its functionality. And so, we would sort of do that work to say, okay, what does this policy change really look like? And what are we looking at in terms of systems impacts? And then what we want to do is we want to pivot, and we want to move to making sure that we're doing community engagement up front before we get into the more technical aspects of the process later on. And what putting community engagement here in this process, or what we hope it will do, is that we make sure that we're collaborating and sort of building the policy as a community, and getting feedback and iterating, updating the Early Learning Council, who is of course our governing body and would have to sign off and adopt any of our regulations, and sort of work to figure out how we can shape the policy in a way that's reflective of the community's needs. And doing that before we move into the more technical aspects in this salmon box, which I'm going to get to in just a second, is important, because once we get there, we start to really start defining sort of very, very specific requirements. So our thought is, by putting this community feedback stage here, there's a real true opportunity to shape what ERDC policy could look like collaboratively. And this, while we call it a community engagement cycle, I don't know that cycle is perhaps the best choice of word, but for our first blush draft, it's what we've gone with. And I mean to say that it's not that we would move from each of these boxes in a very regulated fashion. It's just making sure that we're capturing all of these things in a really rich and valuable way before we start to move into the systems and technical requirements. So I did just want to sort of caveat that that's what it means by cycle. So, after we get to a point where we have a, pretty fully formed policy, we need to take that policy and move it into a space that is jointly governed by ODHS, OHA, the Oregon Health Authority, and the newly created DELC on July 1. And that is really because these changes are going to happen within the one system. And those three agencies, oops, I'm scrolling the wrong way. I don't understand how arrows work. That's because those three agencies are going to sort of have joint, it's joint jurisdiction over the one system in a way that means all three agencies have to bring their change requests, which is the technical term for bringing like a policy change to the group of the three agencies. And they sort of have to evaluate, okay, we have all of these change requests for all of the different programs that the one system supports, whether it's ERDC, whether it's the medical programs, whether it's TANF, SNAP, et cetera. And there's a joint effort to really prioritize and figure out, okay, how can we get all of this body of work done? And once a change request, an ERDC policy request has been prioritized and scheduled for development, that's where we start to get into systems building requirements. And at this point, this is where I want to highlight, once we get into real systems designed work, we start to lock in policy choices. And that really sort of dictates what the policy is going to shape up and come out of as. And so in this sort of salmon colored box is where the policy sort of really formulates and becomes a little bit more polished than at that initial sort of entry box that was blue. One more thing I'd like to mention before we sort of like exit the salmon colored box is that this process, this state agency collaboration and prioritization and the design and the testing and the build that is associated with the one system, it can take a little bit of time. We're not talking about multiple weeks, we're talking about multiple months. And so even though, you know, it's sort of it doesn't take up a lot of real estate on the page, this box does have a sort of longer timeline associated with it than not. And so I did just want to flag that as something to sort of be mindful of. It's like we can enter this box and be in there for a while before we sort of exit the other side. And David or Jordan, do you want to add anything? Did I miss something?
I think I would just also emphasize that once you get into this box, this isn't just proposed changes to employment-related daycare. This is policy changes for Oregon eligibility for Oregon Health Plan, for SNAP, for TANF, and a host of other programs. And you know, I'll just sort of say the reality is there are a lot more really great and important and seemingly really pressing changes to all of these programs and all of these systems than the system can handle at once. So part of what happens once even things get approved to move forward is the process for changes to get scheduled. And because of that capacity, it's quite likely that something might get scheduled out 18 months, 24 months, 28 months. And that's not because people at these tables think that this change is unimportant, but that there's a lot of really pressing changes, and there just has to be some decision made at some point on how to sequence them out given that capacity. So that's part of the reason that the wait time can be pretty long in here.
For sure. And I think the only other thing that I would mention is just that, you know, within this process, there is a point where we're not able to make changes anymore within kind of the technicalities of that policy proposal. However, I think we can still, you know, we will still continue to communicate with partners to let you know where things are at within that process and what policy is being developed.
I think that's a great addition all around. Is there a question in the chat? Okay, let's address, I think, so Dana, you're asking, is that wait time due to capacity limitations of the one development team? I assume those folks aren't Oregon people, is that right? So Dana, I think you might be referring to the fact that the one system is very technical system that's not just an off-the-shelf product to bring in IT speak, but it's rather a sort of uniquely designed system. There is a contractor who supports that work. And of course, there are only so many hours. The one system is also fairly new as well. And so, you know, there's still a lot of rollout to be done as well. So it's not just policy changes that are in the mix. There are other things as well to support the one system. So does that answer your question?
And I think the one thing I would add, and I'm not an IT technical person, so I'm really walking a little on the edge, but I think my understanding is because so many of these programs interact, it's often not that you can make a lot of changes to the same part in coming from different directions at different times. Because of those interaction effects between the different programs, you sort of need to do things in different pieces. so that you're not creating unintentional consequences. So that's at least my sort of slightly non-technical understanding of some of the reasons why, it may not simply be just having more people to be making all of the changes at once, that there is also a need because of those interactions between programs, even that you sort of need to think about the sequencing of different changes.
That's super helpful. Thank you both.
Great. Any more questions on sort of the more technical aspects, where I can move us to our rulemaking box? It's actually an oval, but okay. Once we sort of are done with the design of the one system, obviously there are some rule updates that need to be made. And so we will, continue to do RAC engagement. RAC engagement is very important to the early learning division, and so it will be for DELC. But as we've tried to articulate, at this point, it's really the rules are reflecting what has been decided in the systems work. And so the opportunity to change the material that's being presented is fairly limited. And so we're just flagging that once we get into this box, we're still going to do engagement and awareness and start thinking about, well, how do we roll this out and do it well? But we're not at a point in the process anymore where we can really be incorporating very much or at all any feedback. And so just expectation setting and making sure everyone's aware. That's sort of how we land when we get to the rulemaking process. Obviously, we would go through our process with the Early Learning Council. They need to adopt rules, and then jointly with ODHS and OHA and DELC and all of the storefront offices that support ERDC and all of the staff across the three agencies, we would just move to implementation and executing that policy. And the last thing I just wanted to flag from a community engagement and partner engagement standpoint is, as we think about how to roll out that policy, I think it will be important for us to come back to our partners and say, how do we do this really well? What venues might we not be able to reach that you can? How do we think about leveraging different relationships and communications pathways? And how do we sort of align on a strategy? And I think that's another place where, community partnership and engagement will be really important for ERDC. And sort of it just takes it takes on a little bit of a different flavor from sort of policy making to policy implementation once we reach this point. So I think that closes out at least what I wanted to review with the map. Does anyone else from the team want to make any statements about the policy making process, or should we pull it down and pivot to questions?
I just wanted to let people know again, because this is talking about the rulemaking process, is that for the rules that are being transferred over from ODHS to DELC, and that's just the bulk of the rules that govern the program. There's no changes being made to them. We're just moving the program over. That we do have a RAC starting next Thursday, that people are welcome to sign up to join. And I put that link in the chat up at the beginning of the meeting, but I can also put it back in as well if there's any interest in signing up to be a part of that. So that's all that I wanted just to flag. And that begins next Thursday, but it'll be the following 2 Thursdays as well.
That's an interesting comment, Simone, and also makes me a bit worried. It should not be closed. And if there's a problem, we'll definitely get on that right after this.
Thank you for letting us know.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to pull this down. I can always bring it back up if people want to see it again. But I think that was the end of the materials that we wanted to bring to this group today. If anyone has any questions, we're more than happy to answer them, or if we should pull something back up, happy to do that as well.
Do you want to pull up the final slide from the presentation, Kayla, that just has contact information?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
No problem.
There we go.
Oh, no. Aha.
Great. Yes, I just wanted to make sure everyone had contact information if they needed it. And then there's also information again around the RAC for March 9th, 16th, and 23rd. And then also our communications team asked us to kind of plug some information for you all, which is that the Early Learning Division is now on Instagram. So please follow and share with your friends, neighbors, whoever. It's at Oregon Early Learning. And then there's also a provider newsletter you can sign up for, as well as just, childcare updates that are available at that link listed there.
Kristen, I appreciate your question. I unfortunately don't know that I can, and that's because we don't have the emails tracked from this group. There was no sort of collection function of emails. So unfortunately, unless everyone were to drop their email in the chat, I don't know that we have a vehicle to get it out to folks. Which is not it. And Lily, where can we learn more about rounding hours into part or full time? Lily, could you just help me understand so that I'm answering the right question? Are you looking for more information on how part-time and full-time hours authorizations are calculated? Like if I have X amount of hours, that would equal part-time, that type of information? Okay, well, for the rest of the group, I think there is some information. I'm going to pull this down now, Jordan. There is some information online, and we could drop that link in the chat about sort of how hours are calculated. Tara and Regina, would also a sort of good suggestion be you could always email the child care policy question box if you have specific questions about how an hours calculation might work. But Lily, Tara, go ahead.
I was just saying, absolutely, yeah. Everyone's welcome to email childcare policy. We're happy to help.
Excellent. I think there were a couple more questions in the chat.
Yeah, there was a question I don't think we ever addressed from Leslie higher up in the chat, which is
Okay.
There would be a more user-friendly site to access ERDC information to support providers. And what I just want to say on that is that we have a whole communications team that are working with the branding of DELC going forward. And so there will be some new materials that can be shared in the future.
Okay, just going through the chat again. Could you provide the link to the slides? We will be posting a consolidated set of slides from both info sessions, and that will be, I think, on the ERDC web page under ELD.
Jordan, I think you misunderstood my question. Can I clarify it a little bit and see if you can answer me?
Yeah, please.
So when we're supporting providers to find out, like, okay, are they approved, not approved for ERDC or whatever, and we have to go in Citrix and we have to use the DOS system.
Yeah.
And it's like, holy Hannah, who's going to update this to 2023? That's what I'm asking about. Are we going to have something a little more like, easy to get on and find that information?
In the future, but not in the near term. So DELC is working on a provider management platform that consolidates a lot of functionality, including for the direct pay unit, but also heavily focused on the Office of Child Care. That is not anticipated until 2025. So in the meantime, it would be the status quo functionality. which I recognize there are some improvements that could be made. But our focus right now, everyone's focus across both ODHS and ELD leadership is continuity of service. We don't want to do anything that's going to jeopardize providers getting payments or families, you know, becoming eligible for ERDC. And so we want to make sure we have a successful transition. And then we're going to start pivoting to saying, okay, how can we do this in a little bit of a more modern way?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes. Oh, Lily. Yes,
Hi.
great.
Let me just make sure I'm understanding this correctly. I know on the DHS website, there is a page with all rates for all areas in Oregon, hourly rates, part-time and full-time. I'm wondering, does that mean we're doing away with the hourly rates and we're moving just to the part and full-time distinctions?
You're talking about provider rates, not hours authorizations, correct?
Yes. Is it not going to carry over? It's gonna, sorry, you go.
No, that's okay. Jordan, you came off mute.
Yeah, I was going to say that there aren't any changes right now to the payments, specifically like to the hourly, monthly, part-time or full-time rates. Those are changes that occur through bargaining and other venues. However, the thing that has been changed is how families are approved for hours. So in the past, families were eligible for kind of the highest number of hours that they demonstrated on a pay stub, and then that went through a calculation based on a monthly amount. And then there was travel time added. And so it could really vary from family to family based on their eligibility and how many hours they were approved for. And what will be happening now, and what is happening now, is that families essentially have their hours bumped up to include family well-being activities. And so essentially, if a family is working or in school for 1 to 20 hours, then they get a part-time allotment of that 20 hours per week plus travel time, but they can only be working, 5 hours and still get 20 hours coverage. And then likewise, if a family is working over 20 hours, but under 40 hours, then they would be bumped up to that 40 hours per week full-time allotment. The only thing I really want to flag there, though, is that the amount that providers are charging still depends on the child's scheduled hours. So if for some reason maybe a family weren't going to be scheduled to be in care for whatever reason, there could be that hourly payment that they might bill. But I think for the most part, we'll see more monthly, part-time and full-time payments. I hope
Awesome.
that.
Thank you for it's great. Thank you for the clarification.
Lily, I'm very glad that you came off mute because our original answer was not helpful to your original question. Another question in the chat was related to the RAC sign up and recruitment. I did answer it in the chat, but I think it's helpful to narrate. There's not a selection process for this RAC because it's joint between ODHS and ELD, and because it's such a massive shift, we wanted to make sure that everyone who wanted to participate in the RAC was able to do so. So it's only that we need folks to sign up. Related to when information will be shared, we'll be sending out meeting materials and links very, 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 very soon. So as long as you've signed up, you will get the information for the RAC sessions. Excellent. And then Faye, it looks like you have a question about sending more information about the change on, I think maybe truer 12-month eligibility. Is that correct?
My question is, like, since you guys gonna change to the 12-month, and then as a provider, we don't know when it starts or ends for the family. Usually I just get the billing form in the mail per month, and then I'll like, oh, okay, they cover for this month. But is it like something that you guys can send to the provider, like, oh, so this family is approved from January 2023 to January 24, and then so we don't have to like wait for that monthly billing form and knows if the family is approved or not.
So families are approved for 12 months already with ERDC. Really, the big change that's being made is the removal of closure reasons that can happen. I'm not personally an expert in the one system in terms of what notices might be sent to providers, and so we'll have to take that back. I totally hear what you're saying, though. But I would say that it's still important to receive that monthly billing form, because there are still going to be some closure reasons, few, but there are going to be some, and I wouldn't want there to be added confusion the month of. So if a family moves out of state, that could still be a closure reason if they request their benefits to close for some reason, or if they go over the income limits. And so that's just the only thing I would maybe add there, but we'll look into kind of what notices providers receive in terms of when they're connected to a parent's case.
Yeah,
Okay.
so just when, because what we set up in a system, if we know that it's going to end in February, then we can like, hey, remind the parent like, hey, it's going to end soon, so maybe you want to look into a reapply or something. It's just something we can, some more information we can give to the family, that's all.
Yeah, for sure. I totally see what you're saying.
The other thing I just want to add here, and I know this is everyone's favorite addition, but I think there are maybe some confidentiality or privacy concerns that are factored in to how much information can be sent in those notices. So I just wanted to throw that out there soon, so people could sort of toss that around before we come back with sort of more info and detail.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions? We're only 5 minutes over. Come on, you gotta give me at least 5 minutes more.
I do have a quick question about DPU, if that's
Sure.
okay. I know you had it on the slide for a second. Is DPU still going to be with DHS, or will it be? It will be with you. So similar to the issues with the providers are having, will DPU also be streamlined and maybe have an online version versus a call in and wait for hours version? If you know what I'm talking about.
I do. My answer, I think, is a little bit similar to my answer to Leslie related to, we know that there are a lot of process and systems improvements that we can achieve. I think to both achieve those improvements and also successfully get everyone over at the same time is pretty risky in terms of things falling apart. And we want to really, really, really avoid that. That doesn't mean that we don't know that there are improvements to be made, but for the time being, all of the same systems and structures, especially from an external facing perspective, they're going to be remaining the status quo. But I think there are opportunities over the next year to really look at, like, where do we prioritize our time and effort, and how can we leverage like collective resources and ideas from the community and take this as like we're starting fresh. How do we build and really make it sustainable? But for now, you should expect the status quo.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, we're 2 of my, extra 5 minutes. No one's got more questions. Well, if there are no questions, it's been, I think, really, really nice for us to get to engage with all of you. We're really excited to be inheriting this program. We're really excited to see, where we can take it in the next couple of years. And we're excited to continue our partnership with ODHS. And most importantly, we're excited to sort of build on our partnerships with all of you. So Jordan and I will do our homework. We'll get those slides together. We'll make sure that they get uploaded. We'll have the video recordings of these sessions available as well, should you want to share them out or reference back. And if anyone has any questions at all, and Tiffany, I'll get you in just a second. If anyone has any questions at all, feel free to reach out to Jordan or myself. We're happy to field them, especially if you're having issues with the RAC sign up or something's wrong, and we'll investigate that link issue after this meeting. Tiffany?
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I had a question for the TANF families that are utilizing ERDC. So with ODH, with ERDC currently, like if families find providers who charge over the max amount, they need to pay on top of that, like they have to pay the extra. Will that apply to TANF families who are utilizing ERDC as well?
Yes, so there are still state maximum rates that are in place for any families accessing subsidy. And that's true for both current jobs, TANF childcare, and ERDC. So that will be the case where if a family or if a provider is charging higher than those maximum rates, that that overage would need to be negotiated between the family and the provider. The state doesn't kind of facilitate that. So yes, that would be the case. Although, you know, of course, there's always opportunities for any other negotiations that work for the family and the provider. I hope that answers your question.
Yep, all good, thanks.
Great.
All right, 509 is 510 basically, so I feel like we've made it. Okay, email us if you have any other follow-ups. It was really great to see you. Thank you so much for coming. We're really excited to have you. Goodbye. Jordan, I think do you need to end the recording?